Winter Danger, Chapter 2. In the middle of the afternoon, the sun came out. The rain stopped, and in half an hour the sky was as blue and cloudless as any day in August. Caje and his father still sat by the pile of rocks, sheltered from the wind that had sent the clouds sailing over the horizon. Caje had built a fire, and steam rose from their buckskin clothes. He waited for Jared to say something about the foolishness of building a fire in the broad daylight with no meat to cook. But Jared hardly seemed to notice. He was telling Caje about the cave. "It ain't but a spell from here," he said. "It's on the side of the mountain and looks out over that little valley. Could an airy Injun come up on us without us knowing? And water runs through it all the time. The spring don't ever go dry. There's game aplenty. Bear and deer and buffalo. A heap of buffalo, Caje." He watched Caje as he talked, but the boy stared sullenly into the fire. "What's he think I'm going to do?" Caje asked himself. "Even if I was to say I didn't like it, he wouldn't turn back for me." "Why," Jared went on, "it'll be snug as a cabin. We can trap beaver and kill buffalo and tan the hides right there in the cave. By spring we'll have us a heap of skins. We can take 'em to that trader fellow up in Carter's Valley." He paused again. "He wants me to think that's something," Caje thought bitterly. "I know what he aims to do with them skins. Trade for a new rifle and more lead and maybe a horse, and then go traipsing off again. Get ready to spend another winter freezing in a cave somewhere else. And the best part is this," said Jared slowly. "I brung brimstone with us. There's a power of saltpeter in that cave. It ain't no trouble to make charcoal, and then we can make all our own gunpowder. I always figured I could make powder better than what the trader sells you," he chuckled. "Why, we might find a lead mine near there. We could live down there the rest of our natural lives and not be beholden to nobody for nothing." Caje turned cold all over. Live down there the rest of their natural lives? Never see a cabin or a fire roaring cheerfully up a fireplace. Never eat anything but game and sometimes a handful of persimmons. Never see anybody except Injuns and them you didn't want to see. To wear skins and sleep on skins and even eat skins come hard times. That was the kind of life his father wanted to lead. "You and me'll be partners," Jared talked on. "I'll let you have a third of the skins to trade for whatever you've a mind to. How's that? We'll get rich, huh?" And he laughed. Caje knew why he laughed. No man ever got rich off skins. A woodsy never got rich anyway. He spent his life wandering and considered himself lucky to hold body and soul together for a time. Caje sat thinking over all that his father had said. He hated the thought of staying the winter in a cave, but it was better than spending the cold months tramping the woods and sleeping in hollow logs the way he'd half expected to do. He knew that Jared needed him. Somebody would have to boil the saltpeter down and tend the charcoal fires. Somebody would have to stay in the cave and scrape the skins and soak them. He reckoned these jobs would fall to him while his pa was out hunting and trapping. Well, there were worse things that could happen to a boy. His pa couldn't help being the way he was. Caje couldn't hope to change him. He couldn't hope to make him see that there were other ways to live, better ways than scrabbling for your dinner up and down riverbanks like a coon or a kingfisher. His pa was doing his best to be good to Caje, to make him like the plan. He'd got Caje the bear toes and let him build this fire, and now he was offering him 1/3 of their skins. Caje sighed. He'd have to swallow his feelings. There wasn't anything else he could do. It sounds like a fine plan," he said at last. Jared clapped him on the shoulder. "I knowed you'd like it," he exclaimed. "We're just alike, you and me." Jared took his rifle and went off, while Caje sat hunched by the fire. In a spell, he heard the sound of his father's rifle. Usually his pa made him skin whatever game was killed, saying a boy who didn't know how to use his hunting knife wasn't worth his salt. Caje reckoned he'd let Pa skin his own game today. He sat by the fire and waited. Jared came back presently with a quarter of venison and handed Caje a piece of the deer's liver. Caje ate it hungrily. The liver was warm and soft and tasted much better than it looked. He remembered how his mother never would eat raw deer's liver, but he liked it fine. Caje was glad to have a real meal again. He cooked and ate strips of meat till he was stuffed. While his father molded bullets, Caje rubbed their moccasins with fat and hung them near the fire to dry. Now that he thought Caje was willing to go with him, Jared had dropped his chatty mood. He was as silent and grumpy as ever. He only spoke twice. Once to say that the deer had its winter hair already and the skin wasn't much good for trading, and again to complain about the weather. "It's powerful cold for the 1st of November," he remarked, but even so he put out the fire before he rolled in his bearskin for the night. Caje didn't care. He was warm and dry. They'd rested since noon, and he'd had a good meal for the first time in 3 days. He pressed up to the wall of rock behind him and fell asleep. Early the next morning they started down the mountain. The way was steep and rocky. Caje clutched his rifle and slithered down the slopes. The wind whipped along the rocks and cliffs, streaming out of the north with a whistling sound. Caje turned his face away from the wind that stung his cheeks and brought tears to his eyes. Once they stopped on a bluff where the mountain fell away into a narrow valley. In the bottom of the valley, the savannas were yellow with dead grasses, but a ribbon of tall green cane followed the riverbanks up the center of the meadows. "What's them, Pa?" Caje pointed to 3 dark splotches below them. Jared squinted, moving to the very edge to stare downward. "Buffalo! Them's buffalo, Caje!" Buffalo! Caje had never seen buffalo but once, in Kentucky 2 years ago. He grasped his rifle and leaned forward. He'd like a chance to kill a buffalo. Not many boys his age could say they had shot at one of the big woolly beasts. "They're moving north," Jared said. "We'll hit that meadow downwind from them, if we go down that ridge yonder. We can get one easy, maybe 2. Then we'd have us a buffalo robe to sleep in this winter." He didn't wait for Caje to answer, but started on down. They went cautiously, trying to keep out of sight, though Jared pointed out that buffalo weren't much for seeing. They counted on smell for locating danger. Caje had to admit that Jared knew all there was to know about hunting and tracking. When they left the trees at the foot of the mountain and came out on the grassy plain, the buffalo were right ahead of them and about a quarter of a mile to the left. "We got to crawl," said Jared. "Get down in the grass and follow me close." Caje fell on his hands and knees. The grasses waved in the wind, closing over his back. The buffalo would never spy them. The grass was so tall, and the wind blew it about so that the field might be full of folks creeping up on the beasts. Caje began to be really excited. He stood up once to look ahead, and Jared growled at him to get down. They crawled and crawled. The grass stubble was sharp and cut their hands and stabbed at their knees. Cage's back began to ache from crawling. "Now," said Jared softly, "we ought to get a good shot from here. I'll take the bull and you take one of the cows." They checked their rifles. Slowly, slowly they stood up. Almost at the same time they spoke. "They're gone," Jared grunted disgustedly. "Injuns, Pa," Caje gasped. "Get down." In an instant they were down in the grass. "Where?" whispered Jared. "How many? Did they see us?" "Nah," answered Caje. "There ain't but one, but I think he's coming this way." They crawled rapidly through the grass to get away from the spot where they might have been seen. "Lay still now," Jared whispered. "'Tain't likely he'll spy us." Caje lay still in the tall grass. He was scared. He kept telling himself he and Jared had gotten out of a heap of tight places, but in his heart he knew they'd never been in peril like this before. Never had he done such a thing as lie out in the weeds with a Chickamauga Indian coming toward him, a tomahawk in the red man's hand, and a cruel scalping knife at his belt. Sometimes they'd met Indians out in the woods, but mostly Jared got along with the savages pretty good. He'd know some of their language and talk to them, and they'd part friendly. But the Chickamaugas were different. They hated all white men. They'd never let a boy and a man they found hunting on their lands leave that valley. Suddenly it seemed to Caje he'd a heap rather spend the rest of his life in a cave than have to die now and be nothing but a scalp swinging at some Indian's belt and a passel of bones left for the deer to trample. Oh, if the Indians didn't find them, he'd go gladly with Jared to spend his days boiling saltpeter. Something pressed hard on his ankle. "Pa!" Caje squalled, and looked up to see a hawk-eyed bronze face peering down at him through the tall grass.